There are 3 reasons why you take a graveyard shift at an abandoned amusement park. You're crazy, you're hiding from something, or you're a broke college student drowning in tuition fees. I was the third one. My name is David, and up until 3 weeks ago, I didn't believe in ghosts, demons, or curses. I was a physics major. I believed in cause and effect. I believed that if a roller coaster stopped moving, it was because of friction and gravity, not because something unseen was holding it back. I found the listing on a shady job board, usually reserved for under-the-table construction work. $25 an hour. Unarmed security. Hollow Creek Fun Park. If you grew up in the tri-state area in the 92nds, you know Hollow Creek. It was the premier destination for summer thrills until August 14th, 1998. The official report said a catastrophic structural failure on the main coaster caused the park to shut down overnight. Rumors were wilder. Of course, cult activity, mass hysteria, a serial killer using the Hall of Mirrors as a hunting ground. But standing at the rusted iron gates last month, all I saw was a giant, rotting pile of metal and a paycheck. The interview was short. It took place in a portable trailer just outside the perimeter fence. The head of security was a man named Miller. He looked like he hadn't slept since the Clinton administration. His skin was the color of old parchment, and he smelled intensely of stale tobacco and Vicks VapoRub. "You scare easy, kid?" Miller asked, not looking up from my application. "No, sir," I lied. "Good, because it gets quiet out here. And when it gets quiet, the mind plays tricks. You need to know the difference between a raccoon knocking over a trash can and something else." He hired me on the spot. He handed me a heavy flashlight, a walkie-talkie that looked like a brick from 1985, and a clipboard with a laminated sheet of paper. "Standard rounds are every hour," Miller grunted, pointing to the map. "You check the perimeter fence, the main gate, and the rear loading dock. But these..." He tapped the bottom of the laminated sheet with a yellow-stained fingernail. "These are the special instructions. You follow these or you don't get paid. Clear?" I looked down at the list. Hollow Creek security protocols: do not enter the maintenance tunnels under Sector 3 for any reason. If you hear water running down there, report it, but do not investigate. The main power grid was cut in 1998. If you see lights on the sky-high Ferris wheel, turn off your flashlight and return to the guard booth immediately. Do not look at the gondolas. Check the locks on the carousel every night at 3 a.m. If the horses are facing the wrong direction, counterclockwise, lock the booth and wait for sunrise. "Is this a joke?" I asked, a nervous laugh escaping me. "The horse is facing the wrong way." Miller didn't smile. He stood up, his knees popping loudly in the small trailer. The last guy thought it was a joke, too. He lasted 4 days. "Just follow the list, David. Keep your head down. Do your rounds, and get out at 6 a.m. sharp." He left me there at 9:45 p.m. As his taillights faded down the cracked asphalt of the access road, the silence crashed down on me. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was heavy. The air felt thick, tasting faintly of ozone and rotting wood. I looked at the park, looming behind the fence. The skeletal silhouette of the Ferris wheel cut into the purple night sky like a jagged scar. A cold wind blew from the east, and for a second, I could have sworn I heard the faint, tinny sound of calliope music. I shook it off. "Just wind through the pipes," I told myself. Just physics. I unlocked the gate and stepped inside for my first shift. The first 3 nights were deceptively normal. Boring, even. I spent most of my time sitting in the guard booth, reading textbooks under the buzz of a fluorescent strip light that flickered every 45 seconds. I learned the rhythm of the park. The way the wind whistled through the roller coaster tracks sounded like a low flute. The way the settling metal of the Ferris wheel groaned sounded like distant thunder. I was starting to think Miller was just a superstitious old man trying to scare a rookie. Then came Tuesday, October 14th. It was 1:15 a.m. I was patrolling Sector 4, which used to be the Flavor Kingdom, a stretch of concession stands and picnic tables. Now, it was a graveyard of fast food. The signs were faded to illegible pastels, and the striped awnings hung in tatters like dead skin. I was walking past Popcorn Palace, a kiosk that had been gutted down to the studs. I was looking at the ground, trying to avoid stepping on rusted nails or broken glass, when it hit me. The smell. It wasn't the smell of rot or mildew, which I had grown used to. It was the thick, greasy, unmistakable scent of movie theater butter and hot salt. It was heavy in the air, warm and cloying. I stopped dead in my tracks. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty interior of the kiosk. The popcorn machine was still there, a glass box of rust and cobwebs. I walked closer, my boots crunching on gravel. I shone the light directly into the machine. It was empty, save for a desiccated rat carcass in the corner. The glass was cold to the touch, but the smell was so strong I could taste it on the back of my tongue. It smelled hot. It smelled like it had just been popped 10 seconds ago. "Is anyone there?" I called out. My voice sounded small, swallowed instantly by the open space. Silence. I backed away, telling myself it was some kind of olfactory hallucination. Maybe a chemical spill nearby smelled like diacetyl. I marked it in my logbook. 1:20 a.m. Strange odor in Sector 4. Likely trash. I tried to shake the unease as I continued my rounds toward the midway. I checked my watch. 2:42 a.m. I was approaching the row of carnival games. Ring toss, whack-a-mole, balloon dart. That's when I saw it. Tied to a rusted iron bench in front of the whack-a-mole stand was a balloon. It wasn't a deflated, wrinkled piece of rubber left over from 1998. It was a bright crimson-red balloon, filled with helium, bobbing gently in the breeze. The string was a pristine white ribbon, tied in a perfect bow around the armrest of the bench. I felt a cold prickle run down my neck. I had walked past this exact bench at 10 p.m. It had been empty. I approached it slowly, my hand gripping the heavy maglite like a club. The balloon turned slowly, the shiny red surface reflecting my distorted face. It was impossibly clean, no dust, no fingerprints. "Hello?" I yelled, spinning around to scan the darkness. Nothing but the skeletal shapes of the rides and the endless rows of empty booths. Someone had to be here. A prankster. Some local kids messing with the new guard. That was the only logical explanation. I unhooked my radio to call Miller, but then I stopped. If I called him over a balloon, I'd lose the job. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my pocket knife. I didn't want to leave it there. It felt like a marker, a flag. I grabbed the ribbon. It felt silky and new. I slashed the string. The balloon didn't float up into the sky. It shot upward with violent speed, disappearing into the black void above the park lights in a split second, faster than physics should allow. I stood there for a long time, watching the empty sky, my heart hammering against my ribs. I realized then that the silence of the park had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It felt like the silence of a held breath. I tried to rationalize the balloon for the next 20 minutes. Maybe a localized updraft? A pressurized pocket of gas? I was a physics major. I could explain anything, given enough variables. But my hands were shaking so bad, I could barely hold my pen to write in the logbook. At 2:50 a.m., I forced myself to leave the booth again. I had to follow Rule #3. Check the locks on the carousel every night at 3 a.m. The Grand Carousel sat in the center of Sector 2. It was a massive, ornate structure, a relic from the 1,920 seconds that had survived the park's modernization in the 80 seconds. Even in the daylight, it was unsettling 60 wooden horses frozen in mid-gallop, their eyes wide and maniacal, teeth bared in eternal grimaces. In the dark, it was a mausoleum. I approached the perimeter gate of the ride. The chain link fence was rusted shut, secured with a heavy padlock. I had checked myself at the start of the shift. It was still locked. I shined my flashlight through the bars. The horses were motionless. Dust motes danced in the beam of light. "Clear," I whispered to myself, checking my watch. The digital numbers blinked. 2 hours, 59 minutes, and 58 seconds. 2 hours, 59 minutes, and 59 seconds. 3 hours. The second the minute changed, the sound started. It didn't come from the motor housing. There was no hum of electricity, no click of a generator kicking in. The sound came from the wood itself. Gran. It was a deep, guttural noise, like a massive tree splintering in a storm, or perhaps more accurately, like a large animal waking up in pain. The platform didn't spin fast. It inched forward. Creak, pop, grind. I took a step back, my heart slamming against my ribs. "Who's operating this?" I shouted, swinging my light toward the operator's booth. It was empty. The control panel was smashed, wires hanging out like gutted intestines. The ride continued to turn, impossibly slow. The horses bobbed up and down on their golden poles. Up, down, up, Down. As the lead horse, a massive black stallion with chipped paint, rotated past me. I noticed something wrong with its flank. In the harsh LED light of my flashlight, the wood glistened. I needed to know. I don't know why, but the physicist in me needed to confirm the data. I reached through the rusted gaps in the fence. As the horse passed, I brushed my fingers against its side. It was wet. I pulled my hand back, expecting oil or rainwater. I rubbed the substance between my thumb and forefinger. It was thick, warm, and viscous. It smelled copper sweet. It wasn't oil, it was sweat. The wooden horse was sweating. I wiped my hand frantically on my pants, bile rising in my throat. I stumbled back, my boot kicking something on the asphalt. It was a small pink rectangle, a ticket stub. I picked it up, my fingers trembling violently. It was an old-school carnival ticket, the kind you tear from a roll. It was crisp, not weathered. Admit 1, Grand Carousel date, Oct 15, 1998 time, 3:05 a.m. I stared at the date. Then I looked at my watch. Today was October 15th. But the year. The ticket wasn't just dated for the anniversary of the closure. The timestamp was 5 minutes from now. The groaning of the carousel got louder, pitching up into a shriek of rubbing metal. And for the first time, I noticed the direction. The horses weren't moving clockwise, the way American carousels are designed. They were moving counterclockwise. Rule #3 flashed in my mind. If the horses are facing the wrong direction, lock the booth and wait for sunrise. I didn't wait to see what happened at 3:05 a.m. I turned and sprinted back toward the security office, the sound of the grinding wood chasing me through the dark. I stayed locked in the guard booth for 45 minutes, my back pressed against the door, staring at the grainy monitors. I wanted to quit right then. I wanted to get in my Honda Civic and drive until the gas ran out, but I needed the tuition money. And God help me, the rational part of my brain was already doing damage control. The carousel had a timer, I told myself. The horse was wet from condensation. The ticket was a prank left by Miller. I repeated this mantra until my heart rate slowed. At 4 a.m., I forced myself to stand up. I had one major sector left to check before my break. Sector 5, the River of Gold. The River of Gold was a log flume ride housed entirely inside a massive artificial mountain made of plaster and chicken wire. In its prime, it depicted the California gold rush. Now, it was a damp, echoing tomb. I unlocked the maintenance door at the base of the mountain and stepped inside. The smell hit me instantly. Stagnant water, black mold, and hydraulic fluid. The water had been drained years ago, leaving the concrete trough filled with a foot of thick, black sludge that looked like crude oil. I walked along the metal catwalk that ran parallel to the track, my flashlight beam cutting through the misty air. The ride was populated by 20 animatronic figures, the 49ers. They were life-size robots dressed in flannel and denim, their rubber skin rotting away to reveal the steel skeletons underneath. Most were frozen in mid-action, swinging pans, pointing at fool's gold, or drinking from moonshine jugs. I hated this place. The acoustics were wrong. My footsteps on the metal grate echoed 3 times, sounding like someone was following me. I reached the mineshaft section, about halfway through the ride. Here, the ceiling dropped low, simulating a cave-in. There were 3 miners in this scene. 2 were holding up a collapsing beam, and 1 was swinging a pickaxe at a rock wall. I swept my light over them. Miner hash shown, frozen. Miner hash 2, frozen. Miner hash 3, the digger. I stopped. I knew the layout of this scene. I had memorized it during my first week, because Miner hash 3's face had half melted off, exposing his metal teeth. Usually, his pickaxe was raised high above his head, suspended in an eternal strike. Now, the pickaxe was resting on the ground. Hydraulics, I whispered, the word trembling in the dead air. Pressure leak. Gravity took over. It made sense. It was physics. A seal broke, the pressure dropped, the arm fell. Simple. I exhaled, a cloud of white vapor forming in front of my face. I stepped closer to inspect the damage, aiming my light at the animatronic's face. Click. The sound was sharp and mechanical. It came from inside the digger's chest cavity. Whir. The digger's head jerked. It wasn't a smooth motion, it was a spasm. The head snapped 45 degrees to the left, toward me. I froze, my blood turning to ice. The animatronic was disconnected from the power grid. There was no electricity in this mountain. "Hello?" I squeaked. The figure didn't move again. It just stood there, the pickaxe resting by its boot. I was about to turn around and run when I noticed the eyes. They were standard glass eyes, blue with painted pupils, set into the melting rubber mask. I slowly moved my flashlight beam to the left, illuminating the cavern wall. The eyes didn't follow the light. They stayed fixed on me. I took a step to the right. With a faint, wet sound like two marbles rolling in jelly, the eyes swiveled in their sockets. They tracked my movement perfectly. They weren't looking at the light. They were looking at my face. And then, the jaw unhinged. It dropped open with a dry crack of splitting rubber, revealing the rusted speaker mechanism in the throat. No sound came out. No pre-recorded eureka. Just a low, rhythmic wheeze, like air being forced through a blocked tube. I didn't try to rationalize it this time. I spun around on the catwalk, my boots slipping on the damp metal, and ran toward the exit. Behind me, I heard the clank, clank, clank of a pickaxe being dragged against concrete. I slammed the door of the security booth and threw the deadbolt. I backed away until I hit the desk, my chest heaving so hard I thought I might crack a rib. My mind was racing, trying to categorize what I had just seen in the log flume. Hydraulics, pareidolia, a prank. But I knew, deep down, past the physics degree and the rationalizations, I knew that thing had looked at me. I needed to call Miller. I reached for the radio, my fingers slick with cold sweat. But before I could key the mic, a flash of movement on the wall of monitors caught my eye. The booth had a bank of 12 CRT monitors, feeding grainy black and white footage from across the park. Most were static shots of rust and shadows, but monitor 6, the one covering the main midway, was glitching. Lines of white static rolled vertically down the screen. I leaned in, squinting. "Come on," I whispered, tapping the glass. "Clear up." The static rolled one last time and settled. The midway was a long, paved stretch lined with game booths, leading straight to the Ferris wheel. It wasn't empty. At first, I thought it was a trick of the low-resolution camera. There were shapes moving down the center of the path, blurry, indistinct blobs of gray against the black asphalt. I counted 3, then 10, then 30. I felt the blood drain from my face. Trespassers? I grabbed the joystick to pan the camera, zooming in as far as the ancient lens would allow. The motor on the camera outside whirred audibly through the wall. The image on the screen jerked, then refocused. They weren't teenagers. They weren't looters. They were wrong. There were dozens of them. They moved in a synchronized, shuffling mass. They didn't have the distinct stride of living people. They glided, their bodies stiff, like marionettes being dragged along a track. The footage was grainy, but I could see they were dressed in clothes that looked too dark, too heavy. Long coats, dresses that flared at the knee, styles that hadn't been worn since the late 90 seconds, and they were all flickering. Every few seconds, a figure would vanish into a burst of static and reappear a few feet forward. It wasn't the camera glitching. The background, the booths, the trash cans remained perfectly solid. It was the people who were unstable. I watched, paralyzed, as the herd shuffled past the ring toss. They weren't looking around. They weren't vandalizing anything. They had a singular destination. They were heading straight for the sky-high Ferris wheel. My eyes shot to the piece of paper taped to the desk. Rule #2. The main power grid was cut in 1998. If you see lights on the sky-high Ferris wheel, turn off your flashlight and return to the guard booth immediately. I looked back at the monitor. The massive gray shapes reached the base of the wheel. They stopped, crowding around the loading platform. Then, on the monitor, the Ferris wheel lit up. It wasn't a warm glow. It was a blinding, overexposed white flare on the night vision camera. The giant circle ignited against the dark sky. I spun around to look out the window of the booth. Out in the real world, the park was pitch black. No lights on the wheel, no shuffling crowd. I looked back at the monitor. On the screen, the wheel was spinning. The lights were blazing. And the people were climbing into the gondolas. I realized then that the cameras weren't showing me what was happening now. They were showing me what was happening then. Or worse, they were showing me what was happening on a layer of reality I couldn't see with my naked eye. Then, one of the figures on the screen stopped. It was standing at the back of the crowd. Slowly, painfully, it turned around. It looked directly into the camera lens. It had no face, just a smooth gray blur where eyes and a mouth should be. But I could feel it staring at me. It raised a hand and pointed. Not at the camera. It pointed at the door of my booth. I was paralyzed. On the screen, the faceless thing was still pointing at me. Its arm was rigid, a gray pixelated line directing a silent accusation at my sanctuary. Then, the sound started. It wasn't a mechanical groan or a ghostly whisper. It was distinct, human, and heart-wrenching. "Mommy, please, it hurts." It was a little girl's voice. It was coming from right outside the booth door. My stomach dropped. The rational part of my brain, the physicist, screamed that it was a trap. Ghosts don't have vocal cords. Animatronics don't cry. But the human part of me, the part that wasn't wired for survival horror, kicked in. I scrambled to the window, pressing my face against the cold glass. I couldn't see anything in the shadows of the entry plaza. "Is anyone there?" I yelled through the glass. "Help me, my leg!" The voice shrieked, dissolving into jagged sobs. I looked at the monitor. The faceless figure was gone. The midway on the screen was empty again. The lights on the Ferris wheel on the screen had vanished. Maybe it was a glitch, I thought. Maybe there is an actual kid out there who hopped the fence and got hurt. I made the mistake. I made the choice that separates the survivors from the statistics. I grabbed the first aid kit from the wall. I unlocked the deadbolt. I threw the door open. "I'm coming!" I shouted, stepping out onto the concrete steps. The moment my boot hit the pavement, the world shifted. It wasn't a subtle change. It was violent. The air temperature dropped 30 degrees in a heartbeat. It went from a cool October night to a meat locker instantly. My breath plumed out in thick white clouds. The moisture on my skin froze, stinging like needles. "Where are you?" I called out, shivering violently. The crying stopped. It didn't taper off. It was cut, like someone had pulled the plug on an audio file. Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. I swung my flashlight around. The plaza was empty. No little girl, no blood, no sign of life. I turned back to the booth, a sudden wave of nausea hitting me. I needed to get back inside. I reached for the handle. Click. The sound echoed across the entire park. It was the loud, electrical pop of a PA system turning on. It came from the rusted horn speakers mounted on the telephone poles surrounding the park. Static hissed, loud and angry, filling the air. Then, a voice spoke. It was a man's voice, deep, cheerful, and distorted by decades of decay. It sounded like a recording playing at slightly the wrong speed. "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, the wait is finally over. Hollow Creek Fun Park is proud to announce that the midnight gates are now open." Behind me, in the distance, I heard the heavy thud-thud-thud of floodlights kicking on, one by one, marching toward me from the back of the park. I had left the booth. I had broken the seal. And now, the park knew I was here. The floodlights hit me like a physical blow. 1 second, I was standing in the dark. The next, the entire plaza was bathed in a sickly, humming sodium orange glow. The light was so bright it hurt, searing the afterimages of the ticket booths into my retinas. Then came the noise. If the silence before had been heavy, this was crushing. Every speaker in the park erupted at once. It was carnival music, that upbeat, bouncy organ tune you hear at every county fair. But it was wrong. It was slowed down to a crawl, warping the cheerful melody into a droning, nauseating wall of sound. The bass notes vibrated in my chest, rattling my teeth. Da-da-da-da-da-da. Underneath the music was the mechanical scream of the park waking up. To my left, the scrambler cars began to spin, the rusted joints screeching like banshees. To my right, the pirate ship Sea Dragon swung violently back and forth, its metal keel scraping sparks against the concrete frame. The park wasn't just on, it was hyperactive. The rides were moving faster than they were ever designed to go. I covered my ears, stumbling back toward the booth, but the door had slammed shut. I grabbed the handle. Locked. "Let me in!" I screamed, my voice lost in the cacophony. I turned around, my back against the locked door, and that's when I saw them. The plaza wasn't empty anymore. They were standing in the light, dozens of them. The flickering shapes I had seen on the monitor were now solid, three-dimensional nightmares standing 20 feet away from me. They were dressed in their dated 90 Seconds clothing, faded windbreakers, baggy jeans, floral dresses, but the clothes looked wet, clinging to their bodies. And their faces. God, their faces. I shone my flashlight on the nearest one, a man in a plaid shirt. Where his eyes, nose, and mouth should have been, there was nothing. Just a smooth, concave expanse of pale gray skin. No nostrils, no lips. It looked like unbaked dough molded into the shape of a head. The music swelled, a discordant trumpet blast tearing through the air. As one, the crowd turned toward me. They didn't have eyes, but I felt the weight of their attention. It was a physical pressure, like the air suddenly getting heavier. The man in the plaid shirt took a step forward. His movement was jerky, unnatural. His knee bent the wrong way, snapping back with a sickening crack. But he didn't stumble. He just kept coming. Shuffle, drag, shuffle, drag. The others followed, a sea of faceless guests shuffling toward the security booth. Panic, primal and electric, finally overrode my shock. I couldn't go back into the booth. The main gate was behind them, blocked by the horde. I had to go deeper into the park. "Get away from me," I yelled, though I knew it was useless. I bolted to the left, sprinting toward the narrow alleyway between the arcade and the pizza stall. The music seemed to get louder as I ran, mocking me. I looked over my shoulder. They were faster than they looked. They weren't running, they were gliding, their feet barely touching the ground, closing the distance with terrifying speed. I scrambled over a fallen trash can, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly. I needed a place to hide. A place with heavy doors. The maintenance shed in Sector 3. It was a concrete bunker built into the side of the hill. It was my only chance. I sprinted past the spinning teacups, the centrifugal force of the ride whipping the air into a frenzy. I didn't stop. I could hear them behind me, not footsteps, but the wet, slapping sound of meat hitting pavement. I hit the metal door of the maintenance shed with my shoulder, crying out as the rusted handle dug into my skin. It wouldn't budge. Behind me, the sound of the shuffling horde was getting louder, a wet, rhythmic slapping against the pavement, like a shoal of fish flopping on land. The Calliope music was deafening out here, vibrating in my teeth. I fumbled for the master keyring on my belt, my hand shaking so violently I dropped it twice. Come on, I screamed, jamming the key into the lock. It turned with a gritty crunch. I threw myself inside and slammed the heavy steel door shut, throwing the deadbolts and dragging a heavy metal workbench in front of it just as the first body impacted the other side. Thud. The door groaned in its frame. Thud. Thud. It sounded like they were throwing themselves against the steel without raising their hands, just mindless kinetic impacts. I backed away, gasping for air, the taste of copper sharp in my mouth. I was safe, momentarily. The shed was built like a bunker, set deep into the hill under Sector 3. The noise of the carnival outside was muffled here, reduced to a low, throbbing bass line. I swept my flashlight around the room. It was a dusty, windowless concrete box filled with tools, spare parts, and buckets of dried paint. But in the corner, there was a pile. At first, I thought it was trash. I walked closer, wiping sweat from my eyes. It wasn't trash. It was a pile of personal effects. There were wallets, dozens of them. Leather bifolds, Velcro wallets from the 90 seconds, purses. There were sets of car keys. There were pagers and early cell phones, the big brick-like Nokias. I picked up a wallet. The driver's license inside belonged to a Mark T. Henson. It expired in 1999. I picked up another. Sarah Jenkins, expired 2001. These weren't lost and found items from guests. These were from security guards. I recognized the logo on a discarded uniform jacket crumpled at the bottom. Miller, I whispered. You knew. My light landed on a gray metal filing cabinet against the back wall. The top drawer was open. Inside, sitting on top of a stack of blueprints, was a leather-bound logbook. It looked different from the cheap one I had been given. I opened it to the last entry. The handwriting was jagged, pressed hard into the paper, as if the writer was terrified. The 14th of August, 1998. 11:42 p.m. Officer on duty T. Reynolds. It happened again. The Infinity Coaster. They told us the new loop was safe. They lied. The structural integrity is fine. The steel didn't snap. The reality did. Train 4 entered the vertical loop at 11:30 p.m. with 24 passengers. It hit the apex of the loop, and it didn't come down. It just kept going up, into the dark. I saw the sparks. I heard the screams. They weren't screaming because they were falling. They were screaming because the sky opened up and swallowed the train whole. Management is here. They're talking about a collapse story, a cover-up. They're gonna seal the park, but the ride is still running. I can hear the chain lift. It wants more. I stared at the page. The ink was smeared at the bottom, as if drops of sweat or tears had hit the page before the book was abandoned. Crack! A loud metallic snap came from the door. I spun around. The top hinge had sheared off. The heavy steel door was hanging crookedly, light from the outside spilling through the gap. Through the crack, I saw a gray hand reach in. The fingers were long, too many joints, grasping blindly at the barricade. I looked around frantically. There was no back exit, no window. Wait, I looked at the blueprints under the logbook. There was a service hatch, a ventilation shaft that led out of the shed. I traced the line with my finger. The shaft led upwards. It emptied out directly onto the maintenance platform of the Infinity Coaster. The steel door screamed. That's the only way to describe it. The metal buckled inward, the heavy workbench sliding 3 inches across the concrete floor with a deafening screech. A gray arm, long and jointless like a spider crab, whipped through the gap, flailing blindly for purchase. I didn't wait to see the rest of it. I scrambled up the metal shelving unit, kicking over cans of dried paint that exploded in clouds of white dust. I smashed the grate of the ventilation shaft with the butt of my heavy flashlight. It gave way on the third hit, clattering down into the darkness of the ducts. I hauled myself up, scraping my stomach against the raw metal edge. The space was tight, maybe 2 feet square. It smelled of dead air and grease. I crawled, elbows and knees banging against the sheet metal, scrambling upward at a 45-degree angle. Below me, I heard the shed door finally give way. The wet, slapping sound of the horde filled the room I had just left. They were inside. Up, I gasped, clawing at the rivets. Just go up. The shaft ended abruptly at a service hatch. I shoved it open and rolled out onto cold diamond plate steel. I was outside, high up. I was standing on the maintenance catwalk of the Infinity Coaster, about 60 feet in the air. The wind was ferocious up here, whipping my hair into my eyes. Below, the park was a kaleidoscope of spinning lights and nightmares, the distorted carnival music drifting up like smoke. The catwalk ran parallel to the track, a thick, yellow tubular steel spine that twisted into a massive vertical loop directly ahead of me. To my right, about 15 feet away, was the perimeter fence. A large oak tree grew just on the other side, its heavy branches reaching over the barbed wire. If I could get to the edge of the catwalk, I could jump for the tree. But the catwalk was blocked. A section of the grating had rusted through and fallen away, leaving a 10-foot gap. The only way across was to step onto the coaster track itself. I hesitated. I looked at the track. It was slick with night dew. Clack. The sound vibrated through the soles of my boots. Clack, clack, clack. The chain lift. It had engaged. I looked at the top of the lift hill, the highest point of the ride. There was no train there. The track was empty. But then I heard it. A sound that defied physics. It was the roar of steel wheels on a track, but it wasn't coming from the hill. It was coming from the sky directly above the loop. The air above the coaster rippled, like heat haze on a highway. A hole in the night sky tore open, a swirling vortex of anta-black darkness that looked like a bruise on reality. And out of that hole, a coaster train plummeted. It was Train 4, the missing train. It hit the track with a boom that shook the entire structure. I grabbed the handrail, my knees buckling. The train was hurtling down the loop, gathering speed, heading straight for the section of track I needed to cross. I saw them. The passengers. They weren't faceless monsters. They were teenagers. Kids. Dressed in 1998 summer clothes. They were screaming, but not in excitement. Their faces were contorted in absolute primal terror. Their eyes were wide, fixed on something I couldn't see. They looked gray, desaturated, like a black and white movie projected onto the real world. I had seconds. Newton's first law, I screamed at myself. An object in motion stays in motion. I vaulted over the railing and landed on the slick yellow track. My boots slipped. I scrambled for balance, grabbing the rail. The roar of the approaching train was a physical weight pressing against my eardrums. I could smell the ozone. I could feel the heat radiating from the spectral wheels. The train was 50 feet away, 40. I ran. I sprinted along the curved steel spine, the vibration rattling my bones. 20 feet. I reached the point closest to the oak tree. The train was right behind me. I could hear the wind whipping past the rider's ears. I could hear a girl in the front row shrieking, "No! Not again!" I didn't look back. I launched myself into the void. I didn't stick the landing. Real life isn't an action movie. I hit the branches of the oak tree with the force of a car crash. I felt a rib snap, a sharp, hot pop in my chest before I tumbled through the canopy, bouncing off limbs that whipped my face like raw leather. I hit the ground hard, rolling down the embankment into the drainage ditch outside the perimeter fence. The last thing I remember before the darkness took me was the sound of the train roaring overhead. But it didn't sound like wheels on steel anymore. It sounded like a scream that was fading away, being sucked back into a vacuum. I woke up to the rhythmic beep 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 of a heart monitor. The light was blinding. Not the sickly sodium orange of the park, but the sterile, fluorescent white of a hospital room. The air smelled of iodine and floor wax. "He's awake," a voice said. I tried to sit up, but a wave of nausea pinned me back against the pillows. A police officer was standing at the foot of my bed. Next to him was a doctor checking a chart. "Easy, son," the officer said, stepping forward. "You took a nasty fall." "The train," I rasped. My throat felt like I had swallowed glass. "The passengers. Did you find them?" The officer and the doctor exchanged a look. It was that look, the one adults give a child who is afraid of the monster in the closet. Pity mixed with dismissal. "There was no train, David," the officer said gently. "We found you crawling on the shoulder of Route 9, about half a mile from the old amusement park. You were screaming about faceless people and loops." "It wasn't a hallucination," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. The sterile reality of the hospital was already beginning to erode the nightmare logic of the park. "Actually," the doctor interjected, "we believe it was. Your toxicology screen came back clean for narcotics, but we found trace amounts of methane and carbon monoxide in your blood. The old drainage pipes under that park have been leaking for years. You were likely suffering from acute hypoxia and gas-induced psychosis. A gas leak, of course." It was the perfect, rational, physics-based explanation. It explained the nausea, the headaches, the visions. It explained everything, except for the handprint on my ankle. I saw it when the nurse came in to change my dressings later that afternoon. Around my left ankle, just above the bone, were 5 distinct bruises. They were long and thin, like spider legs wrapping around my skin. They looked exactly like the fingers of the gray thing that had reached through the maintenance shed door. I didn't tell the police, I didn't tell the doctor. I knew they would just say I bruised it in the fall. I was discharged 2 days later. I didn't go back to the park to get my car. I let the towing company impound it. I didn't call Miller to quit. I just blocked the number. I packed my things into a rental van and drove. I didn't stop until I was 2 towns over, in a bustling college town where the streetlights were LED and the silence never settled. I got a job stocking shelves at a grocery store. The pay is terrible, but I work the day shift. I never work nights. I told myself I was safe. I told myself it was just a gas leak. I told myself that physics was the only law that mattered, but I was wrong.